Hi, this is Rich Harrington, and welcome to this edition of the Photoshop CS4 Sneak Peek. We're going to take a look at an important change to how masks work inside of Photoshop. Now, a lot of you don't use masks, but they're a non-destructive way to add transparency to an image. If you need to hide things, you mask it. Significantly better than using the delete key or the extraction command is to mask. So, let's see how it works. I've got this image here, and I'm going to make a quick selection so I can go ahead and actually extract the castle from the background. I'm going to grab the quick selection tool here and just click and start to drag. You see it makes an initial selection. Hold down the shift key and drag a little bit more, and now we've got the sky selected. Now, in order for something to be a mask, you have to have an actual layer. When you open up a Photoshop document, the background is locked. That's because it's a background layer, and it can't have a mask. To make it a floating layer, simply double-click on the layer and give it a name. So we'll double-click here, call this castle, and click OK. With that selected, we can go ahead and click the button down here, which will actually go ahead and add a layer mask. Now, it did what it was supposed to do. It had the sky selected, so it masked everything and kept the sky. Right above the Layers panel, you have Masks, and if you add a mask, it'll switch from Adjustments over to Mask. You can, of course, click at any point in time to toggle back and forth as well. And it's great. We can go ahead and just click the invert button here, and you see that it actually inverts the selection. Now, a mask usually needs some refinement, and looking at this mask here, it seems a little soft on some of the edges. Let's go ahead and zoom in here and take a closer look, and move it down here by panning, and you see we've got a little bit of blue spill in there, and we can go ahead and tweak this. Now, the mask panel itself has a density slider, which essentially lowers the opacity of the mask. The density slider is useful when you're working with partially transparent surfaces like glass, because it allows you to lower the density of the mask so a little bit of the original color value shows through. Now, the feather command will actually soften the edges of the mask, and that's okay if you're dealing with something like hair or a soft edge like a cloud that you're trying to preserve and have a gentle transition between selected and not selected. Where the real power comes in, though, is in actually editing the mask. Let's go ahead and set feather back, and we'll click the Mask Edge button here to make a change. Now, this automatically opens up the Refine Mask window, and you notice that the mask changed a bit. That's because the default values were loaded from the last time we used the Refine Mask command. You can hold down the Option or Alt key and click Reset, or simply drag some of these properties back here all the way to 0 as we start to work. And let's set the expand right to 0 as well. Now, working from top to bottom, this is very similar to the Refine Edge command that you saw in Photoshop CS3. In fact, it's really the exact same user interface, except instead of saying Refine Edge, it says Refine Mask, but works the same. Make sure the description area is toggled down so you can see what's happening, and you start to work from top to bottom. You can use radius to actually improve the edge, and as we play with that there, you'll see that the edge changes a little bit and gets a little tighter. Let's go ahead and use contrast here to get stronger edges, and you see that some of the areas that were soft and fuzzy now lose that little bit of a hint of an edge of blue. As we adjust contrast here, you see that some of the blue fringe on the edge starts to go away. We can use smooth to round out some of the corners a bit, and if we need to, feather it a little bit more to get a slightly softer transition. I'm going to decrease smooth a bit to get rid of some of the rounding that's happening at the edges, and take feather back down and put a little more contrast in there. At this point, we can go ahead and contract the mask a few percentage points just to pull that in. And you see it starts to pull back. So, works very well, and you just play with those settings till you get the results you want, playing with contrast, etc. Now, at any point in time, if you get an area that's hard, like this little divot here, it's a piece of cake. We can go ahead and paint on the mask. Let's just check this really quick. We can look at it as a black and white file, which sometimes makes it easier to see how your edges are doing. Or look at it as a Rubylith mask, and when satisfied, just click OK, and it applies it. To make any change, just make sure the mask is selected, press B for brush, grab your paintbrush, load up some black by pressing the default colors, or D, and you could just paint away any stray pixels that you need to touch up. But that refine mask command works great and really let us get this mask to about the 95% mark. Now keep in mind, any advanced transparency selection will require some manual touch-up, but the mask panel is going to jump you from about 60% correct to 95 or greater % correct, and it really speeds up your workflow. Let's take a look at one more image and see how it can come in handy. Now here's an image that's already been masked, and you'll see that we have very fine details here with spikes on the cactus. We could adjust feathering here if we want to get a softer edge, making those spikes a little more believable so they're not quite as rigid, or click the Mask Edge button. Let's take a look at this here over a color like white so we can clearly see it, and we'll go ahead and reset these values. Now, looking at these points on the cactus, they look a little bit fake. They are actually from the cactus, but they're just a little too rigid. And if we look here, you see that it's just a little rough on those points. I want to go ahead and actually introduce a little bit of feathering on them, not too much, but just enough so they don't look quite so stiff. And then we'll smooth out the edges just a little bit. Put a little bit of contrast back in, and tweak the radius. We'll go ahead and expand it just a little bit. And now you see we've got a great selection on those points. Now, the Edit Mask command is really flexible, so if you close this, you can always open it back up and tweak it, even after closing and saving the document. Let's go ahead and click OK here, so we can go ahead and toggle that off and on, and that's very, very useful. Now, this mask command will come in handy whenever you are working with the image, and it's not going to be just for extracting images to transparency. For example, if we want to actually combine this with a color adjustment, we can still use the Mask Edge command. Let's go ahead and select the flower here. I'm going to grab the Quick Selection tool and click and drag within the flower to make a fairly accurate selection. There we go. And I got a good selection there. And let's go ahead and add a hue saturation adjustment. We'll click over to the Adjustments panel and click on Hue and Saturation. Now we've got the adjustment, and I could change the color of the flower. In this case, I'm going to push it a little bit towards purple and a little bit more saturated. Now I want to make an adjustment here, and it's easy to do that. With the mask selected, we can grab the paintbrush tool. Let's go ahead here, and we're going to paint out the center of the flower. Get a bigger brush, click on the mask, and just paint with black. And you see there that it's hiding the part of the image. And that's working pretty well. We could, of course, get a smaller brush and be a little more detail-oriented there, but you see that that goes pretty quickly. And to make that a little more believable, we'll just go ahead and soften the brush more and quickly paint that out. And you see that does the job. Now, once we have that where we want it, we can go ahead and still modify the mask. Just click on the mask and select the Masks panel. We can use Feather if we want to soften those edges a bit, and you see that that did a nice job. It went from having a hard edge there around the flower center to a little bit more of a believable transition. So it's bringing that yellow back in, but doing it without a hard edge. We can also click the Mask Edge button here if we want to refine this and play with the radius adjustment. I want to go ahead and get that so I'm happy with it, and then we're going to actually contract this so it's not so strong at the edges. There we go. Pull the feather back a little bit and take smoothness down, a little more contrast, and click OK. And you see there it's done a great job of really taking that selection and making it gentle so the color doesn't look fake. We've rolled the hue of the flower gently towards what we wanted, but still have a believable overall color. And that's because we could use the mask panel to really feather our selection and get a better edge. And if you ever want to see the before and after, just click on the eyeball icon there, and you could toggle it off and on and really get an idea of what's happening. So there's our adjustment, the original image and the new image, So you see that the mask just really lets us target the adjustment to just the part of the image we want to modify. So that's it for this episode. I hope you learned some of the new things that you could do with Photoshop CS4. It's a very cool release with lots of great new features that really make it easier to get the job done. Go ahead and visit cs4.com. We could find out additional information, enter our contest, and find all of the episodes in one place. And if you enjoy our training, be sure to check out our regular series. We offer 2 free weekly podcasts all about Photoshop. The first is called Understanding Adobe Photoshop. It's designed for people who work in digital photography, graphic design, or just generalists who want to get more out of what Photoshop offers. For those of you who work in video and motion graphics, we offer another show called Photoshop for Video. And this show is all about using Photoshop to create content for professional video production. Thanks again for joining us. I'm Rich Harrington.